Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of the people. Hello, John.
Hello, sir.
So the saga continues.
Indeed. So it's been about 2 to 2.5 weeks since our last show. Now, there is a very good reason for why we haven't recorded, and that's because of this inquiry into the Banking Amendment Deposits Bill 2020. So the submissions were due last Friday, and given that this is our only shot to press the point that we've been making about this issue, I tried to do the most comprehensive submission that I could. 32-page submission with two opinions from Robert Butler, who's a solicitor in Sydney, on technical aspects of the law. So we really try to lay out the case of. So what I want the audience to know is everything we have said on the show about the international framework, to the state of the law, to these deposit terms and conditions. I've tried to put it all on there and saying, this is how we think this could work, as in this is how bail-in could happen. We have a lawyer saying that our analysis has some validity. Now, the purpose of the law is to clarify that what we think may happen can never happen, and yet it seems to me that this whole process has already been prejudged. So I had some discussions with people from the banking industry last week, and they told me, in effect, that their view was this was going to be dead on arrival in Parliament. And the narrative that I was told last week was this is, quote, unnecessary. So we're going to get into that point going forward. But one of the key things, so we're recording on Wednesday night today. Now, tomorrow, the ABC will be releasing their analysis on this whole issue. And so I've been dealing with the ABC, showing them my analysis. They've read your analysis. There's been a whole host of follow-up questions on technical documents, etc., that we've been going through. So it's fair to say that the journalists I've been dealing with said to me today that they were not aware of this issue. They were not aware of the whole history of this. And so she's educated herself about this, and she thinks through this process, she hasn't taken a position. She's just tried to report the facts as she's been able to establish them, and she thinks that the Australian people who read her piece, which will be obviously broader than our just strict audience, will learn something new out of this process, and I think that's a good thing.
No, I think that's the point. Transparency is good. Sunlight is good, right? It spotlights what's going on. It's worth saying there's a couple of hundred submissions, it looks like, at least there, right, already, and they keep loading them up.
Yeah. So just to elaborate a little bit more about in terms of the submission. So I did sort of just make this point, but I just want to re-emphasize that all of the things we've talked about, and so the point I'll make is with the cash ban, that was very political. In the sense that this was about economic freedom, it was about civil rights. There was no basis to take our rights away, given the government's claims about the black economy, etc. This debate is not about politics per se. This is about the law.
Yep.
And this is why I've tried to go into very technical explanations about what does this clause mean in the law? What does that clause mean? How do these clauses work together? And obviously, this is where a lawyer looking at this is saying, "Yep, this is the correct way. This is the lawyer's view of this is the correct way to read the law, etc." So now, the concern I have is that most members of Parliament have no idea about the law. They don't read the law they pass. They get told by the boffins to pass this, and so when Treasury says X, they basically just say, okay, well, if Treasury says it, so it must be true. So part of the challenge will be is to get the senators on the committee to take a dispassionate view of the law. So because what we have learnt in the last 24 hours is the government has just come out with their submissions have been published, as in the Treasury. And here's the thing, last week I'm told by the banking industry, unnecessary in their view, and they said this is what you're going to hear next week. And what did the Treasury submission say? unnecessary. And then late this afternoon, APRA released some answers to questions on notice in response to my comprehensive submission with the legal opinion, and they said, again, unnecessary. So if there is nothing to see here, so the key point is Senator Roberts' bill is a very simple bill. If there is nothing to see here, there is no downside to passing the legislation. So the question that the ordinary Australian has to ask themselves is, what's the consequences of passing the law? Now, my view is, if there's nothing to see here, no one loses anything by passing the law. But by not passing the law, they're raising all sorts of suspicions about what's really going on. And now, when I was speaking to the ABC today, they mentioned this word conspiracy theory. And I think this is important that we just address this front on, because my view is that, and so we've made this point before, I've been a management consultant, you've been a management consultant. What we're doing here is scenario analysis. If you have a different environment, for example, we're now in the COVID-19 environment, but last year was pre-COVID-19. But so basically we're saying to ourselves, we have some history and we have the law. If we go into a scenario of banks being financially in trouble, what will happen in that situation? So we have a global framework, and that framework from the FSB, these key attributes, says that there's a number of tools that will be used by governments and regulators to limit the financial exposure to the taxpayer. One of those powers, or one of those tools, is bail-in. And key attribute 3.5 says that you're going to bail in creditor claims. Who are the creditors? There's a whole host of creditors to banks, but one of them are depositors. And what are their claims? The claims are deposits. So the international framework says you would bail in deposits. We have signed on to that framework. New Zealand is the most transparent and says, yes, we will bail in deposits. Now, obviously, the other key point I tried to make in my submission was we have done this in Australia before. This is not unprecedented. It's happened in the 19th century. So you will start to hear some references potentially to conspiracy theories, people who are politically motivated, lawyers who are expressing unfounded opinion. But all we're doing here is saying that there is a framework that says if you go into a scenario, this is what you'll do. When it happened in 2013 to the depositors of the Bank of Cyprus, they suffered massive financial consequences. The law, in our view, is unclear, so let's clear it up. So what is there to lose? Yeah,
and it's worth saying, isn't it, that on the other side of the argument, the very complexity of the various laws that all interact, a series of almost deadly embraces, right, makes it very hard for anybody to quickly and easily see how all the pieces fit together.
Yes.
Right? And some would say that's just the way the law works. Others would say there's a reason for that, which is to make it as complicated and as convoluted as possible, to leave everything on the table and to leave maximum flexibility. So in a crisis, APRA could use its godlike powers and basically insist.
Indeed. Now, Treasury has made a series of statements through their submission, and APRA has made a series of statements in their submission saying that everything we've been saying, there's nothing to see here. Now, I have to say that when I look at particularly the Treasury submission, it is full of holes. And so I'm going to be... So there'll be a number of us going through producing a separate document to the submission to respond to the government's claims about this, so we can try to say, well, hang on, you said ABC, but the law doesn't say that. There's ways that you can interpret this slightly differently. But because the ultimate thing here, Martin, is that we have a lawyer. Now again, you could say that it's only one lawyer, but we have a lawyer, a commercial lawyer, who says X, the government says Y. Ultimately, you could say this is going to come down to a court to make a ruling as to which opinion holds. And the point of the law, the proposed law, is to not get it to court by basically just killing out the uncertainty. And yet, there will have to be... So people can go on the inquiry website and look at the Treasury submission. They can read the APRA response, and they can make their own determination if they wish. But from my perspective, I'm going to go through this, but it will take a bit of time because, again, we're talking about quite complex sort of arguments. And the bureaucracy, having been a former bureaucrat myself, bureaucrats, particularly skilled bureaucrats, are very good at throwing up red herrings or misdirection. And there's all sorts of red herrings and misdirection and some of this stuff. And it takes a bit of time to actually work out, well, this is what they're saying, but what does it really actually mean?
Yes. And the old Yes Minister documentary series highlights just how convoluted some of this can be, right? In terms of actually making it very difficult for ordinary people to follow what's going on, and even politicians to follow what's going on. And I think you make a very important point, John, and that is that many politicians will just take on trust what Treasury says or what APRA says and just assume that that's the complete story.
Yes. So I'm glad you said that, because I think the way this is shaping up, this is going to come down to trust. Do you trust the banks? Do you trust Treasury? Do you trust APRA? And the only thing I can say is we have a pattern of behaviour from domestic banks and global banks. Pre-Royal Commission in this country, lots of corruption, if you want to use that term. Globally, a lot of corruption as well. And obviously, when APRA, in their statement today, when they said, well, there's nothing to see here, these terms and conditions that Adams and North are talking about can't be used in the way they're using. I mean, one of the key things to say is that when the banks were up to all sorts of shenanigans around mortgages and all sorts of untoward practices, the regulator was asleep. They didn't do anything to protect consumers in that sense. They were absolutely pro-bank.
So there's been a history of the regulators being on the side of the large organisations, big banks. There's also been a history, remember that the Financial Stability Board globally keeps insisting that the financial regulators should be able to act without needing to seek permission from shareholders or Parliament or anybody, right? So it's effectively anything to support financial stability.
Yes.
So that's their agenda. And it's worth just reflecting on that. So basically what it means is that financial stability comes above all else.
Indeed.
And that basically gives them a license to perhaps do things that normally would not be allowed to be done.
And I'm glad you made that point, Martin, because as I've been talking to the press, one thing I have said is just say the real agenda in Australia is the same as New Zealand. The government can't admit it because it would create financial instability, because it would lead to people taking huge amounts of money out of the banking system. Even if there is a public hearing with the inquiry, the question has to be asked: what is the value of the Treasury evidence as well as the APRA evidence? Because anything they say, they can't say anything other than what they're saying, because of their role about financial stability. And the only way we will truly ever know the government's agenda is in the middle of a crisis, to see, well, what did they actually do when it really came to crunch time.
Yeah, so you could argue they've got a prisoner's dilemma on their hands, insofar that they could never admit the truth, because if they did admit the truth, it would immediately create the crisis.
Yes, indeed.
Yep.
Now, one of the shocking things that came out this afternoon was, so when you look at all the submissions, so the bulk of the submissions is say, we support this law, pass it, give us certainty. The government and the Australian Banking Association has said, unnecessary, don't pass it. But then we actually had a former policy director from the Australian Banking Association, who actually, back in the 90s, worked in the office of Prime Minister under John Howard. He actually says, no, clear up the law, but he says make deposits, put deposits on the table, but because there are benefits for everyone. So the New Zealand model of deposits being bailed in, he says that imposes market discipline, and that's actually a good thing. And so now. I had some communication with this individual after I read his submission via social media, and he knew who I am. So maybe his name's Nick. Maybe Nick watches this show. But I'm just going to quote this a couple of sections from his submission because I think it's worthwhile to just give our audience a bit of a different flavour. So this is Nick Hozak, principal from Benchmark Analytics. So this is part of his submission, quote, apart from prudential capital regulation, bank depositors also impose discipline on bank shareholders and executives through the risk of a deposit run. A material proportion of bank deposits are at call, so the bank is at risk of a widespread and rapid customer move to withdraw this money, potentially creating a liquidity crisis. As a consequence, risk of a deposit run imposes a discipline on banks to ensure prudent lending. By prohibiting depositor liabilities to be used for recapitalization, the bill in effect shifts bank lending risk back onto taxpayers. So now again, there could be, from a policy argument, that could be a valid position. Now, it's not the position I hold, but at least it's saying that no, there are benefits to bail-in because it keeps everyone on their toes effectively. So now, even if you say that's a valid position, the issue is that the government has to tell customers that if you are going to use the banks, there is an element of risk. So, and you need to actually understand what that level of risk is. So it goes back to your point is, we just need to be transparent. Is it on the table, off the table? But this wishy-washy sort of, we're boxing at shadows. We're signing international agreements saying we're going to do this, and the law is unclear. But there's nothing to see here. I mean, that doesn't create confidence for anyone.
No, it creates confusion. And just to go back to New Zealand, just to be really clear, they've had this particular set of rules in place for quite a few years now. They've got transparency on their website, so it's very clear. They've also got disclosure bank by bank by bank, and they've made the point that end users of banks, depositors, need to actually make their own risk assessment of the relative risk of Bank A versus Bank B versus Bank C, because deposits could potentially be taken under a bail-in scenario, right? That's all absolutely clear in New Zealand, no argument. Here, it's impossible for any depositor to make any judgment about the relative risks of Bank A versus Bank B versus Bank C. There's no disclosure. And in fact, APRA is barred from providing information down at individual bank level. So they have to provide aggregated data all the time. Now, they have said they want to try and tidy that up later, but at the moment, it will be impossible for people with deposits in Australia to work out whether Bank A or Bank C or Bank B would actually be more or less risky.
Indeed.
It's a huge hole.
Absolutely. Now, I want to come back in a future episode soon in the next few days and go through some of these arguments that Treasury and APRA have raised, just so we can go into a little bit more detail. But I think it's so after our last show, a lot of people emailed me asking for my summary. Now, the summary is still valid, but in the full submission, we go into a lot more detail. So if anyone wants to read the full submission, feel free to email me, and we'll put the email back on the screen. And so there are some additional elements that are in the full submission that were not in the summary, because as I was researching, there was a few more things to answer. So feel free to email me and we can send out the full submission. It is also available on the parliamentary website if people want to look at, as well as your submission if people want to look at the North submission.
Which is shorter.
Yes. So it is shorter. But again, the ultimate issue here is, it's your life, it's your money, it's your wealth, it's your responsibility. And so, you can, I'm happy for people to say, I've looked at the Adams thesis, the North thesis, the Butler analysis, and I just don't believe it. That's fair enough. You can say, I trust the government. You can say, I don't trust the government. But what you can't say is, I wasn't informed and I want someone to make this situation go away. So now again, you haven't withdrawn your life savings from the banks.
No.
I have. I've gone a different route. And even though we haven't talked about a banking crisis, I mean, one thing I will say is there is a new study in Europe that was reported by the Irish Times that said if COVID-19 goes into 2021, the banks in Europe may be in trouble. So we're not out of the woods yet in terms of the global debt bubble, where the banks are going, stability, etc. So again, they can continue to print, and if they print, that could prop the system up to a certain point. But if they stop printing or if the defaults become too powerful, there are some uncertainties. So whether you want to say caveat emptor, it is each to their own. I mean, people just need to be aware of this stuff because, again, even on these terms and conditions, and in terms of these and that are in these contract clauses, most Australians have no idea what are they've signed themselves up to.
Yeah, and we're not saying that the banks are going to fall over tomorrow, but if you look around the world, overnight, the Fed actually said that there were more risks now in the banking system than previously, right? And 3 banks in the US gave their quarterly updates, and all of them put huge provisions because of their concerns about job losses and company collapses in the US, right? And they all referred directly, both the Fed and also to those 3 organisations, including Citigroup, to the risks because COVID is going to go on longer, right?
Yeah.
So we are definitely in that sort of situation where there are risks. And I think, John, the key point to make is nobody can say that we haven't highlighted the question about bail-in, right?
Yes.
So if, in fact, down the track, APRA pulls the trigger because of a crisis and bails in, right, at least we can say, there, we told you, right? But there is an opportunity through this inquiry and through this process to try and get the thing cleared up. And it's a simple fix, isn't it?
Yes, but one of the things I would say to our audience is one of the good things about our collaboration and in terms of the show. I mean, the things we've talked about has led to legislation, has led to an inquiry, has led to the government providing more information. So unlike other platforms where they just talk, we talk that leads to real tangible action. And let's see what happens in the next 3.5 weeks.
Yep. Yeah, in the interest of the people, not words only, but words that lead to action.
Absolutely.
John, thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Martin North, John Adams. In the interest of the people, we'll see you next time.